Welcome back, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. We're continuing on with different interviews for aquatic professionals that I've met in my career here in Alberta. And I'm especially focused recently on different stories and different experiences because not everyone has the same path that they take to aquatics. And so I'm really excited today to be able to reconnect with someone I haven't talked to in a few years, and it is Fowaz Ikram. So welcome.
Hi, thank you for inviting me, Katie, on this podcast. So, a little bit of introduction to myself. I've moved to Canada a little over, actually, I'm going to hit 11 years next week. So, yeah, I came to Canada from Pakistan as a student. And then after I did my master's in engineering, I joined the Canadian Red Cross in the interim while I was looking for work and spent a good amount of, let's say, 18, 19, or even 20 months there as a swimming and safety water representative. Also looked after the first aid programs and training partners to an extent, and then eventually in program development, kind of coordinating the WSIT research courses, the WSIT courses. And then finally, I kind of moved on in the energy industry, coming from my engineering background and then living in Calgary. And so I've been in that ever since.
Aquatics is one of those things, whether you stay for 1 year, 10 years, I feel like it has a lasting impression on a lot of us. How did you get into aquatics? You said you were a student, and a lot of students get started in aquatics, but did you have a particular passion? Did you grow up swimming, or what made you want to start working at the pool during your college experience?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I remember, I'd say for the better part of my earlier ages, I was also born in Saudi Arabia, and so I've kind of moved with my father in the Emirates, and then I was introduced to swimming through my father, and that's just something that kind of really sort of planted the seed. My mother tells me that my father was very passionate. He qualified for Asian Games sometime in his college for the diving competition for India. So that was before like partition time. But his father did not allow him to participate. So it was kind of there with my father, and he kind of instilled that in all of my siblings as well as me. So I was kind of swimming on and off, on and off. It was only I kind of did my undergrad in Pakistan and moved into a very remote gas production facility, like literally in the middle of nowhere. But fortunate for us, it was the largest natural gas production facility in the country. So we had a lot of amenities inside, and I was lucky enough to move in a time where they were renovating their swimming pool and had that for all of the employees there. And so I kind of started swimming there, being on like a 20 days on the field location and then 10 days off. I had nothing better to do for those 20 days after work, and then just started kind of getting serious about swimming. So kind of watching YouTube videos, watching Michael Phelps do his dolphin kicks. That was unreal. And just really starting getting curious, kind of looking at what could be the drills that I could use to make myself efficient. I'd say 4.5 years was quite a bit of time for me to get better. And then every 10 days I would come back home, try to find a swimming pool where I could just, find a 10-day pass and still stay in the rhythm and then go back. I would be very actually motivated to go back so I can be more consistent. And so that kind of happened like 3.5, 4 years. I was getting good in a lot of strokes like freestyle and being a shorter person, short legs, breaststroke was one of my fortes. And so after moving to Canada, I came as an international student. So for me, it was one part is okay, getting the studies done. The other part was okay, I'm paying twice as much than most folks here. Started looking at what could I do, and I was seeing like my roommates, working at gas stations and warehouses, every opportunity I could find. And then when I went to the University of Calgary, I sort of started swimming, and then I signed up for, I don't know if you remember, it was the Red Cross Adult Swim Workout. And I told the instructor, this is way too easy. And so I was like, okay, what do you want to do? And it's like, I should be doing something better. And they kind of introduced me, hey, this is the pathway that you need to take. You have to take your AWSI. And at that time, lifeguarding wasn't particularly in my mind. But I was more like interested, like, can I be a swimming instructor? And so it's like they kind of told me this, like, you have to do your AWSI, then you have to take your WSI. But at the same time, what I saw was, okay, if you are a swimming instructor, unless you have swimming lessons going 8 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can't really cover up for the hours, so you have to be a lifeguard as well. And so at that time, with Life Saving Society, you have to do your LSI, you have to do your, and then you have to do your NL, the bronze medallion as a prerequisite. And so I was like, let me see how much time it could take. And so I kind of calculated if I could do all of this in like 6 months, squeeze all of this in 6 months, I could probably be a fully certified lifeguard plus swimming instructor in January. And, study and work at the same place is just super convenient. So that was interesting. I still remember that -40 polar vortex time in November where I was like waiting for a bus to do a bronze medallion. So yeah, that was kind of the start for me.
I love the story about the work camp swim experience, because that's one I haven't heard, but I do know when I lived in Lac La Biche, so up in northern Alberta, there's a lot of work camps up there. And for anybody who's watching this who doesn't know what these work camps are, so there's a work site, whether it's oil, whether it's forestry, whether it's mining, whatever it is. They bring in trailers for people to live in, and they have to provide a certain quality of life because it's a for-profit or operation, either third party that's hosting these workers. And so there has to be quality food services, there has to be gyms, there may be recreation services or other amenities. The oil producer has to incentivize the workers to be happy to be there for anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 days at a time. So I don't know of any here in Alberta that have a pool, but that's a pretty interesting story, because that's what I often would hear from guys that would come into the pool in Lac La Biche is all there is video games or working out, right? Yeah. So it's amazing. Were there a lot of people in that pool with you? Did it get a lot of use, or was it just?
No, it definitely got quite a bit of use, and that's just because it was this part of Pakistan which is like close to the province of Balochistan, which is like pretty much like a desert, so very dry, classic Alberta dryness with the 55 degrees. So people, especially on the field, like I was working as a production engineer, so I would go at remote well sites to do work. And yeah, to kill off the heat, a lot of people would come in. But at the same time, I would be the crazy person where it's raining, I would still go. Whether it was, a storm or a windstorm, I would still go. It was like 10 p.m. in the night. It was an unsupervised pool, I will have to admit. So I would still go and swim. It was like, okay, there's nothing better for me to do. So my friends who have moved to Fort Mac, they said the Fort Mac Island, it's kind of along the same lines. It's a level up than most rec facilities you find in central or southern Alberta. I haven't personally gone there, but given that it's such a great big hub of oil, all the oil companies that are there, they're probably pitched in a lot of sponsorship for that facility.
If you ever get up there, it's beautiful. McDonald Island Park, the Suncor Aquatic Center, it was around $90 million just 15 years ago to build. And it's a 50-meter pool, a 25-meter pool, multiple hot tubs, water slides, teaching pool. It's definitely up there in one of the most impressive pools that I've personally visited. And further to that, I would say for people who don't live in Alberta, there has been really good investment for all of the people who detract from, natural resources, and nobody's perfect, but they have spent a lot of money investing in small communities like Port Chip. They may not put a pool into the work camp, obviously, but communities of 500 or 600 people are getting a 25 or a 15-meter pool to really try and invest in those areas, both on Highway 63 and then further north. So it's really, really interesting to hear that was so formative in your experience, particularly as you were saying, your dad wasn't able. Would you say culturally in your dad's generation, it was not as acceptable? Swimming was not as accepted as a social activity, or it was more just that he was expected to move into work at that stage in his life?
Yeah, the cultural part would be one thing. The other thing would be like my grandfather he was a professor in the Aligarh University, which is basically the first, I'd say, non-traditional university kind of focusing on modern education. And he was a professor of physics. And so he was very much focused for his sons to, get your get and that's probably one of the reasons he kind of had like, you know what, let's yeah, we're not going to go look at this. Let's just focus. And he graduated from the same university, and all of my siblings for my father, they're also engineers too, and they kind of all around. So yeah, it was more around focused on career. And
Mm-hmm.
yes, definitely sports is number two. You kind of mentioned around the investment these companies have done. Like think about Norman Wells. I remember getting a call from Norman Wells. They needed some material, and I had to Google that place. And I was like, this is north. Like
Mm-hmm.
Norman Wells, it's like the upper part of Northwest Territories. There's no roads that go there. There's a little bit of movement during the winter when the lake freezes, so full on ice road truckers. Otherwise, you have to fly in, fly
Mm-hmm.
out. Like the company that I work for now, we have a pipeline there, and that's just for the company that's producing oil there. But it's actually very humbling to see that these companies are still supporting the community as well as kind of
Mm-hmm.
finding ways of profitability. And eventually they're all proportional, right? The more profitability, the more they would be invested in the
Mm-hmm.
community there itself too.
Brought that up because I think the Northwest Territories, the Yukon, Northern Alberta, I mean, that's one of the things I always share with people when they say, why did you leave Ontario? Why did you come out west? And one of the things that I've been very pleasantly surprised about, because I didn't know that much about Western Canada before I lived here, just the stereotypes. And there's so many small communities, like you've said, where they really have made an effort to, it could be the village of Champion, which is not too far south of me, but it's a village of 400 people and it's got a 2-lane, 12-meter pool. Or when I was in Fort Simpson last year, similar to what you're describing, not as far north as the Arctic Circle, but you got to fly to Yellowknife, then you got to take a puddle jump for 2 hours. There's only one flight a day, and it's a fly-in community in the winter and a only drive out in the summer. 900 people, and they had, I believe it was a 15 or 20-meter pool. Right? Only it's not winterized, it's in a Quonset hut, but really the commitment to these communities to provide these options, I think, is wonderful that we have that culture in some parts of Canada. Things I wanted to ask you, so you got your lifeguard training, you got your swim instructor training, and then you were able to find a job teaching while you were in college for was it your master's at that point?
Yeah. Yes. So this is fall 2013. Instead of taking 3 courses, I can just take 2 courses, and then I can focus on all of these other aquatic courses. So I'm kind of set up for success for the next year. And so that's how I kind of reprioritized everything. And so I did all of my courses, which included one EWSI with teaching, with WSI with its co-teaching, the Bronze Cross, Bronze Medallion, and then the NL. So it was very interesting for me because I was hunting at different facilities trying to see how can I set everything so it's one after the other. So that was a very, very hectic, I'd say, part of my life. It also helped me because this was the first time I had been away with my family. Like working at the gas field, I was away, but only for like 20 days. But then this is like, okay, I'm sort of away from the family. I had a sister that was in Edmonton that I would go up and visit often, but then like I kept myself so busy that I didn't find myself to be lonely. And so going forward, I started working at the University of Calgary. At the same time, I was in a course-based master's, so I kind of moved to a research-based master's too. And that's just because course-based, when like grading and assessments wasn't really my thing, I kind of wanted to like take a deep dive into something, and research was kind of my things. It was interesting because I was studying, I was working, like researching, as well as once I would be done with my research, I would just go down to the university and do my lifeguard shift. And so 3-4 years, I was introduced to the Canadian Red Cross through the leadership at University of Calgary. We attended a couple of conferences. Really liked the culture of the organization. It was kind of reflected in the conferences, and it was just fun. And it's like, okay, a conference can be fun. That is very interesting because of the academic conferences that I attended, they are so 180 degrees. And so that was one thing that really had a special place in my heart. And so when I graduated, my professor asked me, "Hey, do you want to be a research assistant for a year?" I was like, "Sure, I can do that." But then also this opportunity came up of someone was going on a maternity leave. It would be good for me to actually work in a Canadian organization, kind of understand the larger organizational culture here. I worked in a corporate culture back home, but that's different. But working in Canadian Red Cross would be a good kind of start off my career. And through those conferences, people had enough good references for me to actually end up with that role. So that's how I finally entered the Red Cross.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such good foresight that you had, that I think lots of people, I know certainly when I've lived overseas in different places, the work culture, as you said, is very different. The social culture may be very different. And even if you're a good worker and you're qualified, it's still reading those unspoken cues. I remember when I lived in Israel, for example, there culturally, you do not celebrate a baby. You do not buy gifts. You do not buy flowers until the baby literally arrives. You can hide the gift in your house. You never give the gift until the baby literally shows up. The stores will store the gifts for you. You do not give the gift. And the only way to learn that is doing it wrong. So there's a lot of things like that I think the Canadian Red Cross, at least my experience with the organization, has always been very positive. And so you were a swimming and water safety representative, is that correct?
Yes, so I was the water safety representative for Southern Alberta, so everything south of Red Deer.
So a good geography lesson too, probably, right? It got you around to different places.
It was interesting because everything from Rocky Mountain House to Tabor, everything across, and from Stettler to Crow's Pass. So like I mentioned to you before, I'm finally going back to visiting those places. I remember a 3-day road trip across Alberta where I actually went on Cowboy Trail, Crow's Pass, Venture Creek, Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, Tabor, and then went up on the Air Force Base, Sheffield, and then Brooks, and then Drumheller, and then going up Stettler, and then coming down Red Deer, and then finally coming down Calgary. So it was a big road trip for me.
Alberta is such a great place for that. I know the distances are quite far for some people. If you grew up in a more urban area, driving 2, 3, 4, 6 hours in a day might be surprising, but that's what I do a lot for my work. It's a really great way to meet people and see different facilities. And it's honestly, like we were talking before, I can't fly from Okotoks to Jasper. I'm going to have to drive. And there's so much to see along the way. Alberta has such varied communities, such varied nature, from prairies to mountains to forest. It's really a unique place. And it's great that you were able to do that a little bit for your work, right? Because you would have to go and see different affiliate facilities and check in on their programming, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would go in, check in with their programming. I mean, we recently migrated to a different technology for handling the training partners / customers. And so a lot of those meetings were around, okay, what are the issues that you're facing with that? You know, coming from my engineering background, a lot of things that I kind of knew well enough to help them navigate that. Some of these facilities would also have our lifeguarding program too, so kind of getting feedback from them on the lifeguarding program as well. And at the same time, you know, folks in Pincher Creek or Lethbridge might have a different social setting compared to someone in Tabor or Medicine Hat or Drumheller. They have their own challenges. So it was really good. The geography part is one thing, but kind of understanding the social setting for each of the communities was also pretty enlightening.
I think so many people anticipate, okay, well, a pool in Edmonton is the same as a pool in Calgary, and it's not. It's the demographics, it's the history, it's the industry, it's the family lifestyle. When I was in Northern Alberta, family lifestyle was very geared towards, do you live on an acreage out of town? Do you have a partner who works in the oil field and they're gone, so you're a solo parent part of the time? What does that look like if you're homeschooling before the pandemic, when very few people were homeschooling, or religious modesty concerns? Lakeview is the oldest Muslim community in Alberta. The first mosque in Alberta was settled there in the early 20th century. And people don't realize that, you know, Lebanese Muslim culture is a huge part of the community there. And that shocks people compared to, well, Alberta is so white. What do you mean that they would have women's only programming? Or what do you mean that you would have, you know, family-based swim where there's age restrictions on which age of children or boys can come? You can't do the same thing everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. I can appreciate that now just because I've lived in downtown for a few years in Calgary and then I moved into the suburbs just because I needed a bigger place. The area, it's very demographically diverse, and it's good to see the Y here has that women's only programming. I saw that in their programming. That is good to know. That's, there's kind of that presence and facilities are listening to their patrons.
I mean, and I think that's one of the things that the Red Cross does really well. You can have your own idea of what you want people to do, or you could have your own idea of what might be the best thing to do. And if it doesn't connect with the community, or if it's not what they need, then it doesn't matter, right? We have to be stewards or servants of what the community needs, and we can make suggestions or recommendations, but if it's not going to work, it's not an ivory tower. It has to actually work, right?
Absolutely.
When did you
Yes,
leave the
so
Red
I was
Cross?
gone before the announcement, but when I look in hindsight, I would say that this is something that's probably coming. And people would always talk the business side of the Red Cross about how first aid is very profitable versus swimming and water safety. When I got news of that, so I had moved, so I worked for like the Red Cross for 18, 20 months. I switched to a few roles. So first aid, water safety representative, kind of assisted the first aid program, and then the person on mat leave came back, but there was someone else going on mat leave, so I got moved to that role and sort of helping them with their WSIT research cycle, coordinating the volunteers and the recertification programs. And then because I was under prevention and safety, I was approached by a recruiter for a midstream company, and we were kind of looking for this health and safety analyst, data analyst kind of person, and you are that. So I moved. That was my first big transition into the company that I worked for. I was under SNR, so safety and reliability, and so I was during that role. And after I'd say 5-6 months, so it was year 2020, everyone started to working from home, and that's when I I got the news that they were winding up the program. So that was a bit heartbreaking because I so wanted. I have two little ones. I so wanted to have them do a Red Cross swimming lesson, be on the other side of the bleachers and see the program as a parent. So yeah, that was kind of bitter.
To fill in the gaps for people who might not be aware, the Canadian Red Cross ended their swimming and water safety program. The announcement came somewhat shockingly for lots of people in January of 2021, and there was 11 months to wind down the program and start to transition to another program. As a lot of you know, though, when you're programming months and semesters in advance, by January, you've already programmed the winter, maybe the spring, you're working towards summer and switching staff credentials, budget. There was a lot of hurt feelings and a lot of grief from people like myself included. I grew up in that program, believed in the program, but I had somebody share with me unofficial kind of documentation that they had seen about the loss margins on swimming and water safety. And the way it was explained to them, the way they explained it to me was, as a nonprofit, as a charity, you can't keep betting on a losing horse, right? You need to fund your whole model, your staff. You have to be a financial steward. You can't run losses. And I think part of me wonders if we hadn't had the pandemic in 2020, which closed so many pools here in Canada, maybe that faucet would not have been so abruptly shut off. But the numbers that I saw were so large that they couldn't give it more time to recover. And speaking now with hindsight, so they wound down the program at the end of 2021. In Canada, Canadian pools barely recovered into 2022, 2023. So I think it would have happened in the next few years if it didn't happen at that point. But it's really too bad either way.
For the last 3 years, I've been in the commercial space, so even like nonprofits have to follow certain rules of the game. They're answerable to their board, and it's not like even the fundraising models use similar strategies as like customer churn, profit, or corporate for-profit organizations. So all of that was something that probably contributed, but at the same time, they like the way that they put it, it was to reprioritize because drowning related deaths were going down statistically speaking, and opiate related deaths were going up. So they needed to reprioritize, refocus too.
And there were other providers in the market. I think that's That's one of the pieces, is that there are other companies or other organizations that offer swimming and water safety related programs, whether it's swim lessons, whether it is lifeguard training. And so that's where we are in 2024. The Canadian Red Cross, they still offer those other education and awareness programs like first aid, opioid awareness, different work safe programs, but there's just no longer, like in the US, they still have these programs because they're separate organizations, but we no longer have a Red Cross water safety instructor, Red Cross Learn to Swim, Red Cross lifeguard program. All of those have been wound down, and the curriculums are proprietary, so nobody's using any of that IP. It's just gone. And it's relegated to those of us who've kept our badges or certificates. That's it, unless something changes and they bring it back in the future. So you ended up in the private sector. How has that been going for you? And do you still have any connection to aquatics?
It's interesting because when I was in prevention and safety, water safety, first aid, when I moved to private sector, also oil and gas midstream, it's interesting how I could speak the language, especially a lot of my day-to-day was reporting on safety incidents and reporting and doing data analysis. One thing that was a really good asset for me is even though I was not a CRSP, which is like a Canadian Registered Safety Professional, I could very easily understand and speak the language, and that was coming from lifeguard, Red Cross. So I understand what hazard identification is. I understand what risk tolerance is. I've learned all of that, and I talk about it, but from an entirely different context. So that was something, I guess, transferable skills is not a myth. That is a thing. And so I got into that. I was a contractor for, I want to say, a little over a year and a half. And then the good thing about that organization is when you're a contractor, they ask you if you want to become a full-time employee. It's a very career-oriented organization where they focus on a lot of career development. As a contractor, you can't really do that. Like, it also depends on you too, right? So the way contractors work are they're more, I would say, financially oriented, and they find that path of, you know what, I'm going to have my incorporated, probably save on taxes, XYZ, but I was more, no, I need to learn, I need to grow, develop as a professional in this organization. So I took that path. Interestingly enough, customer relationship management, Red Cross was working on that, but I kind of moved into customer relationship management for a midstream company, which is, looking at, let's just say, tens of thousands of dollars to like millions of dollars worth of customers.
A couple extra
zeros.
zeros.
It's a couple of extra zeros for sure. And so use same principles, same systems, same way of, reporting data, but definitely a different customer base. And what's interesting with these larger organizations, even though Red Cross was way ahead in terms of what we call CRM or customer relationship management system, there wasn't something like that set up in an organization that big because they never really needed it because they really had no competition. So they didn't find worth investing the money. And plus, your top 10 customers are bringing 95% of your revenue. We really don't care about the 5%. And Red Cross worked on a slightly different business philosophy. So that was a very good experience for me. Coming from my engineering background, did a lot of analysis on health and safety related incidents, finding trends, and then moving into customer related analytics. And finally, I'm in a new role as of this May into data governance, where I am the eyes and ears in all of the organization in terms of data. So definitely picking a lot of things from what I learned from Red Cross, as well as things that I learned in university during my grad program, and trying to learn and as curious as every day.
It's so interesting what you were saying about the CRM, and just customer relation management in general, because when I started my business, one of the first things I knew I wanted to do was have some sort of software to track people. And it wasn't going to be our sales software. And I didn't know why I wanted to do it. I just knew I wanted to do it. And in speaking with another business owner who did something similar, he said, well, I have an Excel book. And I was like, no, I'm going to pay for a software. I'm going to put in people's names and emails and phone numbers. And all we really do with it now, we have some photos in there, so I know who's who. And I occasionally will put in life events. It's not as detailed as people using Salesforce or something like that for cold calling. But I guess I never really thought about like the connection you just said, Fawaz, where it's like that relationship that we have on the pool deck with our colleagues or with our parents or with our kids. I just always did that. And so it was natural for me to think when I have a business, we're going to keep doing that. But I very distinctly remember, like I said, my colleague saying, why would you do that? You can just put their name in a spreadsheet. I just switched softwares last year and the export file is terrible. There's 2,100 people and we've only been in
Yeah.
business for 7
Yeah.
years.
The flip side of this, now that working in the industry for 5, 6 years with CRMs, is oftentimes, especially in bigger organizations, is sometimes you don't need to technologically solutionize everything. A very good example for me is an executive assistant of a very high-ranking VP in an organization approached our IT team and said, I need a relationship management tool because I'm getting too much information for this person, and he's like second to a CEO or something. And what do we do? And so all of a sudden, the IT department went DEFCON 5. We need to find this solution. And you're like, okay, wait. Eventually, he's like, okay, let's work on this. So we worked on like 6 months of how to provide a solution. And it was, and eventually a CRM related solution. When it got presented to the middle management, they said, no, we're not going to spend X million dollars on this. And so, okay, what do we do? You know what? Let me talk to this assistant. I just showed her how to connect Excel to the VP's email inbox and their calendar and just extract that data directly into a spreadsheet and that solved the problem. It's like, oh dear, we just spent 6 months worth of work to that. And so that's the flip side. But yes, now I'm in this space where we talk about data value realization and value frameworks. And so once we start to think about if this technology is going to help you need to articulate the value of it as well, right?
I'm 100% with you, because when I was switching CRMs, I was really dissatisfied with the one I had, and I didn't realize actually, frankly, how misaligned they were, because the first CRM I selected in 2018 and our business needs in 2023, 2024, when I started searching, were quite different. And so it was a great opportunity to see what those bells and whistles were. But at the end of the day, I went with a more simple CRM because I don't want to track individual sales. I don't want to schedule follow-up phone calls. I just want to have people's contact information. I want to store photos of their facility. I want to maybe put their birthday if I happen to know it. And then when they call me, I can pull them up on an app. And because my husband jokes, you have all these random men in your phone because it'll be so-and-so from Hilton's and there'll be 17 Andrews. And I have to pretend I know which Andrew is calling me because they're all different. That customer relationship of trying to quickly remember what their pool looks like, what our last discussion was, and trying to not artificially maintain that relationship, but try and have somewhere I can pull up that information in a fairly efficient way.
Yeah, no, you're right. The thing that I got from our leadership was, if you can take CRM in a way that this is my XYZ customer, it's not just like, from a technological perspective, but you have to also think about what relationship management means.
Well, and I think for me, it's very much an expression of me as like an empathic person as well. It's not purely sales driven. So for example, one of the things I was thinking of doing, not right away because it's too soon, but going through and finding all the addresses I have for people in Jasper. And it's just saying a simple thinking of you card, not on company letterhead, no business cards, just spending an hour, because I've worked in that town for many, many years. And there's people who've lost their homes and it's devastating, right? And that's not a 1 week, 2 week solution. That is 6 months of their life that's going to be upended. And I think back to when I've had things happening in my life, to be seen or recognized that I'm more than a lost revenue opportunity. That's more important to me. It's not trying to maintain a relationship to make money. It's saying, hey, I spent a lot of time working with you since 2018. I know your kids are going to be impacted. I know your wife's going to be impacted. I know your home's going to be impacted. That's the human side of business that I like being able to do as the private company. And I think the Red Cross, at least outwardly, it appeared like they really tried to invest in people emotionally that way when they couldn't always do so financially. That was the impression I had.
especially when we had a person who was straight up, like you said, empath and would know what this volunteer would want. And then, just even giving something as a small token would touch the volunteer in such a way that it cannot be replicated. That was a very special moment for me. There's definitely been a lot of special moments for me, but the way Red Cross, especially with their volunteers, the way they would treat them, it's just I've not seen that in my 10, 11 years of working here.
So you've been in the private sector for a couple years now. Do you still swim? Do you take your kids swimming? What are you doing these days? And are you still in the pool at all?
So when I started Red Cross, I had a newborn just literally a couple of months old. Now I've got two girls, 6 years old and almost 3 years old. So both of them, I take them swimming. And it's always good to try to go to the pool, use your lifeguard muscle memory to see if the lifeguard, you're a parent as well, an ex-lifeguard. And so that, plus I'm big into like gravel cycling in the summer, so I do a lot of races. So swimming for me is like when it's too cold to commute, I always go back for swimming as cross training, because once you get into cycling, you realize your limbs are not made for running or any sort of impact related exercise. And so swimming is probably the next best thing. And so I try to keep myself in the pool at least, I want to say 4 to 5 months. And then, yes, on the bleachers, seeing my kids taking lessons. A lot of folks have, it's interesting. A lot of folks have reached to me, hey, do you want to do private swimming lessons? Like, you teach my kids? Like, I don't have time for this, please.
I hear you. I think it's funny you say that about the private lessons. Somebody was asking me recently, they wanted help with learning to swim. And I said, I want to help you, but I don't know anywhere where we live where we wouldn't get in trouble for just going to public swim. I know all of these pools. I really can't do that. And I don't think you can afford to rent a lane. So it's tough. I see both sides of it, especially it's adult hard for people like mentally to overcome the barriers culturally, or if they've had a tragic circumstance that prevented them from learning how to swim. And Canada has such a water culture. And I've been watching the news this summer, the number of drownings we've had. They're generally on the decline in Canada, but the summer is always the worst when it comes to our glacier-fed lakes, cold water shock, boating and drinking. There's always stories, unfortunately.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's definitely like, even for my wife, she started learning swimming here, so I had to push her quite a bit, like got her into lessons and then gave her time after the lessons. And so it takes effort, but at the same time, I remember a lot of folks who actually came from the same part of the world as me and looked at me during my swimming lessons, and they were good at it, and eventually I would see them in certification courses and they would come back like, yeah, I think when we saw you, and if you can do it, we can do it. And this kind of included folks who were PhDs and working in the natural resources industry, kind of got laid off during the downturn, and they were trying to figure out what to do. And so they remembered a Fowaz somewhere who did this, and so maybe we can do that. And so that was very encouraging for me to see too.
The swim instructor side of our industry in general, I would say it's very heavily skewed female. So when you get a male instructor, that really says a lot for the male learners who want to learn, because not everybody is comfortable or capable of learning with somebody who doesn't have the same experience as them.
Yeah. So it's interesting you bring that, because with what happened with George Floyd and BLM, there was a lot of talk of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion in our in the organizations. Recreation was interesting because you had like this 80-20 percentage of staff, so 80% being female predominantly, and then 20% the rest. And the corporate side is the opposite. And for me, being in that minority position helped me understand the challenges women or other minority groups would be facing in the corporate culture. So one thing I kind of started getting more open about sharing is, I remember my first few months as a swimming instructor, when I would walk along the deck, parents would just keep staring at me. And I was like, why are you staring at me? And I wasn't a parent then. I'm a parent now, and I would only stare the way that they stare at me if I would suspect this person to be a pedophile. It was just a very hard experience for me. But being underprivileged, coming as an international student, trying, at the end of the day, I had to like really take it in. But at the same time, once the lessons would be done, giving my full effort and my heart and soul to the kids, these parents would be the same parents who would bring us donuts at the end of the day. And that was something that I'd say I keep that experience very close to my heart, is like, okay, you know what, whatever biases that we have, and racism doesn't stand any contact. That's how Trevor Noah kind of called it. And so that was one very good experience for me, coming out of aquatics and then moving into other areas in life.
I think with Alberta, that is definitely one of the downsides when people have lived in other more multicultural areas. Speaking just for myself, when I lived in Toronto and I worked at the University of Toronto, we had all ages, all demographics, all races, all religions working at that pool. And then certainly in Alberta, there is still the stereotype that Alberta is very white, because it is very white in a lot of places. I mean, something as simple as I flew back home yesterday. I was in Toronto Airport, Pearson for a few hours. Much different appearance of people in the airport than when you arrive at the Calgary airport. And then if we take that further in terms of people who have access to swimming, people have financial ability to swim, to buy a bathing suit, who know how to swim. I mean, those levels of privilege just stack on top of each other. And then you do end up with the people swimming, and they're all white, privileged, and a certain ability. So it's definitely an area, not just in Alberta, but aquatics in general, where some people are working really hard on it, but some people I think are completely clueless. Like when it comes to providing a women's only swim or modesty accommodations, one of my pet peeves as somebody with a bachelor's and a master's in religious study is the lack of understanding about cultural and religious modesty being made a pool safety issue when it's not a pool safety issue. Ignorance that's not educated about religious rights and the significance of modesty in certain cultures. You can swim safely, modestly, with the right knowledge or the right bathing suit, but not everyone can afford the right bathing suit. I know when I lived in Lakeview and we started buying bathing suits to sell, our top seller was men's jammer short to women, because they wanted a full-length short.
Yeah, you're right. People would come and ask me, they wanted to swim sort of using modest clothing. It's like, yeah, it's fine. If it's recreational, it's totally fine. But then once you go into competitive swimming, aerodynamics, using my engineering, and it's not the most efficient thing, you could certainly swim the same length, but you'll be putting more effort. So just keep that in mind. So I kind of gave them the other side perspective too. But yes, you're right. There's definitely there's definitely a bit of work that needs to be done in terms of breaking the bias too. Well, I'm glad you're more in touch with the industry, and so I'm glad to hear that this work's being done there.
I mean, I think the work is being done, and I place some hope that it's being done with good intention, and it's not just, putting up a logo, putting up a, we're going to do this DEI initiative with, exactly. And I think that's where I do want to record at some point a chat just about different types of swimwear, because the one that really got me this summer was Vancouver just came out with a swimwear policy, and it prohibits flowing fabric. It's so restrictive in terms of even something like a burkini, which is made of lycra, which is as proper as you can make it in terms of being safe to swim in, is going to have flowy fabric, or like a swim hijab. To have a policy in a public facility that's publicly funded, there's just so much wrong with that, in my opinion. But I was shocked, because Vancouver, we think of as a multiculturally diverse, I would expect that maybe in central Alberta, but not Vancouver. We're kind of near the end for time. Is there anything else you want to chat about? Anything else you want to share?
No, I guess we're quite a bit here. 1 hour passed quite fast, and it was a great experience talking to you, and it was kind of nostalgic too. I really remember that road when I was driving to Tabor from Medicine Hat. Thank you for inviting me over.
No, I'm so glad we were able to catch up. I know it's amazing. We were talking before we got started how recently it feels like that research was, but also how long ago it was, almost 6 years at this point. And so much has happened in our world in the last 4.5 years with the pandemic, but maybe you'll get back into it. Who knows, right? Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.